Mission support to crew. Your visitor is arriving in the airlock now.
Great, thank you.
Welcome to Mars.
This is the Mars Desert Research Station, or MDRS, near Hanksville, Utah. For the past 2 weeks, members of Crew 315 have been running experiments and practicing for what life on Mars may be like.
We got here to the EVA site. I found some rock samples that were the right size for our rig. Took 3 scans of this, aligned them on the software, and processed it as a 3D mesh. And we basically took a rock sample without having to bring it back or send it back to Earth.
The station is run by the Mars Society nonprofit, to which Elon Musk has donated over $100,000.
What we're trying to do is figure out what should be in the field training manual for crews on Mars.
While this is just a simulation, President Trump and Elon Musk, the world's richest man, want to make living on Mars a reality.
We will pursue our manifest destiny into the stars, launching American astronauts to plant the stars and stripes on the planet Mars.
We're gonna take Doge to Mars.
Elon Musk has said that his company, SpaceX, can get humans to Mars as early as 2029. Meanwhile, NASA officials have said that sending humans to Mars even by 2040 would be an audacious goal. China, too, is interested in the Red Planet, with the country planning to establish an autonomous Mars research station by 2038.
Mars is the Rosetta Stone for telling us the truth about the potential prevalence and diversity of life in the universe.
The technologies we develop to be able to send a crew to Mars do have direct beneficial impacts here on Earth.
But landing humans on Mars and settling the planet will mean overcoming a number of daunting technical challenges and risks that humans have never faced before.
The Mars landing problem is complicated. The transit problem is super complicated. The radiation environment's very severe. The life support problem, the reliability has to be super high. Your propulsion capability is not, we got to get better in all those areas. All of those things are hard.
If something goes wrong on the International Space Station, there's always a capsule there. They can always come back down to Earth. A mission to Mars, there's no rescue plan.
CNBC talked to experts to find out how close the US is to getting humans to Mars, and what some of the biggest challenges are that we face along the way. Elon Musk has said that going to Mars is tantamount to preserving humanity and escaping the ever-growing threats to Earth, including natural disasters and warfare.
There's a high urgency to making life multiplanetary, and we've got to do that while civilization is still strong.
For scientists, Mars offers possible answers to questions such as the prevalence and diversity of life in the universe.
The early Earth and Mars were twins, actually. They were both rocky planets with liquid water, CO2-dominated atmospheres. So if the theory is correct that life originates naturally from chemistry where you have the right physical and chemical conditions, then it should have appeared on Mars. Now, the question then is, well, first of all, did it? And if it did it form exactly the same way?
The more we work in space, we are learning so much about materials, about biology, and then we are translating that into improved drug delivery systems, into new materials that can make lighter aircraft or more efficient batteries.
But while experts are excited about the prospect of visiting Mars, the public seems less convinced that it's worth it. One survey found that just 11% of Americans said that sending humans to Mars should be a top priority for NASA. Participants ranked monitoring the Earth's climate and objects that might hit the planet as NASA's most imperative functions.
I think most people in the public don't understand why going to Mars is important. What if we weren't an adventuring species and we all hung around in Africa since the dawn of man? How big of a population could Africa support? Going to Mars gives us another huge landscape to spread civilization and humanity over.
As is typical of space exploration, getting to Mars will not be cheap, and the potential benefits must be weighed against the cost. The first human mission to Mars is estimated to cost about $500 billion. This is 2 or 3 times the cost of either Apollo, the Space Shuttle, or the International Space Station projects, and could be as much as all 3 together. Still, NASA's nearly $25 billion budget for fiscal year 2025 made up less than 1% of the US government's spending. And this budget could get even smaller. The Trump administration has proposed a plan to cut NASA's budget by $6 billion in 2026. The majority of the cuts would come from the agency's space science, earth science, and mission support divisions. At the same time, the proposed discretionary budget calls for allocating more than $7 billion for moon exploration and introducing $1 billion in new investments for Mars-focused programs.
NASA has learned how to operate more efficiently in the past couple of decades, and I think they can do more with less than they used to, but they can do more with more as well. And if our goal is really to get to Mars soon and to get to the moon first, it's going to take some real investment.
NASA is increasingly dependent on private companies to build much of its infrastructure. But aside from working on government contracts, experts say the business case for these companies isn't there.
I'm not sure there's a great business case directly for going to Mars. The strongest business case actually for going to Mars is more that what we will develop in terms of technology along the way has lots of value creation potential for Earth.
Weinzierl points to GPS and satellite internet, both of which have brought massive market value to Earth.
Docking technology with lasers led to LASIK eye surgery. Technology developed for the space shuttle led to heart pumps, and filters developed for astronauts now filter water on Earth.
Sending astronauts to the moon was an impressive feat for humanity. But experts say recreating that moment with astronauts on Mars will be much harder.
The difference between going to the moon and going to Mars is like the difference between visiting grandma's house and launching an Arctic polar expedition. They are not even in the same league.
Mars is on average 140 million miles from Earth, while the moon is on average 238,855 miles away. The idea is to send humans to Mars at its closest approach to Earth, which happens every 2 years when the Earth is between the Sun and Mars. While a trip to the moon would take 3 days, traveling to Mars would take 6 months, with an entire mission likely to last about 3 years before astronauts can return to Earth. Among NASA astronauts, Frank Rubio holds the record for most consecutive days spent in space after 371 days aboard the International Space Station. A mission to Mars would require almost 3 times as much time spent in space. Getting to Mars will also require many untested technologies. At the core of Elon Musk's plan to reach Mars is the tallest and most powerful rocket ever built, Starship. When it's stacked on the Super Heavy booster, Starship stands 403 feet tall, is about 30 feet in diameter, and is capable of launching up to 150 tons to space. In March, SpaceX conducted Starship's 8th test flight. While SpaceX was able to successfully retrieve the Super Heavy booster, the Starship spacecraft exploded, leaving a trail of debris in its wake and disrupting commercial flights.
This timeline of sending a robotic Starship to Mars in 2026 and then a crewed version 2 years after that is so aggressive that it's essentially impossible.
Musk's plan to travel to Mars also includes another unproven technology, the refueling of Starship in space.
Starship is designed to send 100 tons of material into Earth orbit. Once it gets into Earth orbit, it's empty, so we need to refuel it. Once it's refueled, it can go to Mars.
But Robert Zubrin, who's an astronautical and nuclear engineer in addition to being the president of the Mars Society, thinks SpaceX could benefit from building a smaller craft.
I call it Starboat. It could be lifted all up to orbit by a Starship fully fueled and just shoot off to Mars without refueling.
Another option, Zubrin says, is to use SpaceX's much smaller workhorse, the Falcon 9, to launch Starboat, thus reducing the weight and fuel needed to get the rocket into space. SpaceX's Starship also plays a big role in NASA's Mars plans. The agency's first order of business is to return humans to the moon under its Artemis directive, which was announced during Trump's first term. This will serve as a stepping stone to Mars.
It's not exactly like we can use the exact same technologies that we'll use on a lunar base on a Mars mission, but we can learn a lot about how to have a self-sustaining, long-term habitat module for astronauts where they could spend a year or more completely cut off from Earth contact.
Under Artemis, SpaceX has received about $4 billion from NASA to build a modified version of Starship that will ferry astronauts from NASA's moon orbiting station Gateway to the lunar surface and back. Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin has also received a $3.4 billion NASA contract to provide another lunar lander. To launch humans to the moon, NASA is building 2 other vehicles, the Space Launch System rocket built in conjunction with Boeing, Aerojet Rocketdyne, and Northrop Grumman, and Orion space capsule built in conjunction with Lockheed Martin. At least that's been the plan. Under the new proposed discretionary budget, NASA would retire the Space Launch System rocket, Orion spacecraft, and Gateway programs. Also on the chopping block if the budget is approved by Congress is NASA's Mars Sample Return Program, which sought to use rockets and robotic systems to return Martian samples back to Earth for analysis. This new direction is in line with Musk's sentiment. In the past, he's called NASA's Artemis moon program a distraction and said its architecture is extremely inefficient. In a 2021 report, NASA's Inspector General estimated that Artemis would cost the government about $93 billion from fiscal years 2012 through 2025. Zubrin agrees that the Artemis development is bloated.
The Artemis program, frankly, is a total mess. It is NASA at its worst. We don't need this whole Artemis architecture, which is Starship plus SLS plus Orion plus the National Lander plus the Lunar Orbit Toll Booth. We need Starship plus Starboat.
Musk would likely be happy to oblige. After spending nearly $300 million to help Trump win the presidential election, Musk has become one of the president's top advisors. Most prominently, Musk spearheaded the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, which is tasked with slashing federal spending, including by shrinking agencies that regulate many of his companies. As of late, Musk has scaled back his role as DOGE chief, but his close relationships with the Trump administration has raised concerns about conflicts of interest. Meanwhile, Trump's nominee to head up NASA, Jared Isaacman, also has ties to Musk. During his nomination hearing in April, Senate members expressed concerns about how Isaacman's relationship with Musk could influence his decisions as NASA's new boss.
Mr. Isaacman, you have deep personal and financial ties to Elon Musk. You have invested tens of millions of dollars in SpaceX. You have paid millions of dollars to SpaceX for 2 private space flights. Your payments company, Shift4, has an ongoing, quote, global strategic partnership with Starlink worth millions each year. Given SpaceX's significant interest before NASA, you can understand why the public would be concerned about conflicts of interest here.
When asked what steps he would take to ensure Musk had no undue influence on NASA, Isaacman simply said that his loyalty was to the nation. During the hearing, Isaacman said he would redirect NASA's resources to work on Mars and the Moon mission simultaneously, a goal more in line with Musk's objectives.
As the president stated, we will prioritize sending American astronauts to Mars, and along the way, we will inevitably have the capabilities to return to the moon and determine the scientific, economic, and national security benefits for maintaining a presence on the lunar surface.
Assuming our technology works well enough to travel the millions of miles to Mars, another challenge will be landing on the Martian surface.
The rovers we have on Mars are weigh around a ton. Starship is supposed to bring 100 tons to the Martian surface. And so that means it has to land on the Martian surface controlled, smoothly, softly. We've never done that before.
Mars is also not a hospitable environment for humans, with temperatures capable of dipping to negative 225 degrees Fahrenheit and an atmosphere devoid of oxygen. Even a small puncture in a person's spacesuit in these conditions would prove fatal.
There is very little atmosphere. Less than 1% of the air pressure on the Earth. What air is there is carbon dioxide. There are literal toxins called perchlorates in the soil. The Martian gravity is much weaker than that on the Earth. We know that low gravity environments have very detrimental effects on human health. Our bones get less dense, our blood vessels shrink, our hearts get smaller, our muscles get weaker.
While loss of bone density and muscle degradation can be mitigated somewhat through exercise, radiation is harder to tackle. Earth's atmosphere and magnetic field act as a shield against radiation. In contrast, Mars's very thin atmosphere and lack of a magnetic field means astronauts will be constantly exposed to some level of radiation.
Galactic cosmic radiation is this ever-present radiation, and so we have no ability to shield that right now unless you want to send something like tungsten up. Tungsten is a very thick and heavy metal, and that would be something we really can't bother to make a spacecraft out of. It would be far too expensive.
Bokhari says that while she doesn't believe galactic cosmic radiation to be very dangerous in the short term, in the long term, exposure could lead to an increased risk of cancer. Our vision could also be affected.
It's something we actually noticed when we started sending people to space for longer periods of time. We started to see some people have eye changes and they would have vision changes. There is obviously a real concern that if you put people in space for even longer than a year, maybe that shift will be great enough to cause a vision loss, and then that would be a huge problem to the mission.
The prolonged isolation and confinement that astronauts face in space also makes them vulnerable to psychiatric disorders such as anxiety and depression, which can affect their sleep, morale, and decision-making. Communication with Earth will also be tricky.
I'm taking a Starlink Mini and a mobile battery pack and bringing that on our EVAs to provide myself and other crew members the ability to send data back to our station or even to quote-unquote Earth.
And when we're on the International Space Station, it's really only 207 miles up from here on Earth, so you do have communication immediately. But when we go to a place like Mars, that communication delay could be up to 40 minutes, 20 minutes each way.
Unlike the International Space Station, which gets regular resupply missions, humans living on Mars will need to be completely self-sufficient. To prepare, crew members at the Mars Desert Research Station have been growing vegetables and mushrooms.
We grow tomatoes and radishes and carrots and a bunch of different herbs. And then I have a mushroom growth project. Then it was supposed to grow blue oyster mushrooms, but ended up maybe being a little too dry here.
Any future Mars colony would also need to be able to produce its own energy.
We make our electricity by several means. One is we have a very large photovoltaic solar array. The solar array also charges a bank of batteries, and as a backup, we have a generator that runs off of propane fuel.
The International Space Station also uses massive solar arrays for power. But on Mars, a more dependable solution is nuclear power. This technology is still in its infancy for use in space.
There are dust storms that can encircle the entire globe of Mars and blot out the sun. So if you're relying on something like solar power, you better hope that there isn't a sandstorm during your mission.
Finally, assuming that we don't want our trip to Mars to be a one-way ticket, we need to be able to manufacture fuel on Mars to power our rockets back. Again, something that's never been done before.
Martian carbon dioxide and water can be turned into methane and oxygen, which is a good rocket propellant combination, and in fact, it is the propellant combination that Starship uses.
We still have a lot to figure out before we can even attempt to safely land humans on Mars, let alone establish a colony, leading some experts to doubt the ambitious timelines that have been set.
An actual crewed mission to Mars, I'm gonna ballpark like at least 100 launches of Starship, of tankers, of sending craft out there for supplies, for backups in case something goes wrong. In terms of time, 2 to 3 decades out, like 2050s.
But Zubrin is optimistic we can get to Mars sooner.
The most aggressive time frame I see is we work very hard to get a robotic expedition launched to Mars before the end of Trump's term. We launch another such expedition in 2031 to prepare the landing site for the first human mission. We establish a power system on the surface of Mars. We start making rocket propellant on the surface of Mars. And then in 2033, we land the first human expedition.
Even when humanity does go to Mars, we will never forget our true home.
If in one day we can actually terraform Mars, maybe we can undo some of the harm that we've caused on Earth through climate change. We go to space to help humanity survive.
The role of Mars in the human future is not for a place for some survivors to hang out while the Earth is destroyed. It is a place where new branches of the human civilization can develop, which will add their creative genius to the progress of humanity as a whole, to increase our ability to deal with all challenges. We go to Mars not out of despair, we go to Mars out of hope.